that, I will turn it over to Cassie Alia for our second Learning Community Series presentation, and we're so thrilled to have her speaking with us today. So Cassie, it's all yours.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate getting to meet y'all and to share my story. Today I'm just trying to figure out where I want the pictures. There we go, so I can see your lovely faces. So the title of my presentation today is To Serve and Connect, a Police Widow's Testament to the Power of Community Psychology Values. So just a little disclaimer, I'm a bit under the weather today, so if I seem a little out of it or lethargic, that's why. I apologize, but I'm really thankful to talk with you all today. All right, so here. So a little bit about me. I am finishing my PhD in clinical community psychology at the University of South Carolina. And actually, before we got started talking today, I was chatting a little bit with Jessica, and she was asking if this was my program of research or how it linked in with the work that I've been doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later throughout the presentation. But some background, before all these life changes happened, I've been primarily focused and very passionate about addressing community health disparities and promoting health equity. And I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of really outstanding community-oriented initiatives. So the picture you see of me in the corner at the farmer's market, I worked with Dr. Darcy Friedman, who's at Case Western right now, helped get started the Right Choice Fresh Start Farmers Market, which has informed a number of pretty important national work around food vouchers and farmers market vouchers work. I most recently have been working very closely with my mentor, Dr. Abe Wandersman, focused on our implementation science work and frameworks. Presently, I am the co-project director of the evaluation of a national community health capacity building initiative that's led by 100 Million Healthier Lives called SCALE. So it's with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement is the main convener of that work, and we're heading up the evaluation. So it's a really neat project. I'm also, after we finish up here, I'll be headed to the CDC, where we're going to be talking about the use of readiness. So in the Office of Smoking and Health. So I share this to give some context to who I am. You know, yes, I am a police widow, but I'm also very passionate and proud of the work that I've done as it pertains to community psychology, and very much come from a place that values and advocates for the issues and the disparities that are experienced by marginalized groups and the use of community psychology skills, especially empowerment, evaluation, and implementation science to address those issues or to address health equity issues. So the plan for today, this is a little bit longer of a presentation than I normally plan to give, but I want to give the full scope, I think, of my story, you know, how this work began, and kind of walk you through the journey of what's now going to be leading to Serve and Connect. And so starting with from tragedy to advocacy, talk about the beginning of this movement, talk about how we've really sought to listen and learn and grow in this work, and share with you some of my thoughts about the future, which I think you'll see more of an intersection, hopefully even more clearly, between community psychology and this response that I've had to my grief and loss, and then have some broader reflections about what this may mean broadly for the work in community psychology, and addressing divisiveness and police and community relationships. And then I'd love to leave it open to a discussion to hear more from you and consider how we may better integrate community psychology values and skills into this work. All right, so this is kind of where the story begins. This is my husband, Greg Alia. So Greg and I met, it was the summer after my junior year in college at University of South Carolina. I was out one night and I was very committed in getting into graduate school, so no boys for me. And of course, that's when I met Greg. We had fun, talked all night, and I left without exchanging my number because I was very committed to getting into graduate school. And, you know, So we ran into each other at the grocery store the next day, and that was it. You know, I don't know if there's such a thing as love at first sight, but if there is, that's what Greg and I had. He was my partner. He was my best friend. He made me a better person. He made me the woman I am today. And so Greg was, he also graduated from USC. He initially went into movie production. He worked on movies like Iron Man and Indiana Jones, but he felt called to go into law enforcement. And so I met Greg when he had just moved back from California, and he had chosen to go into law enforcement. So our whole relationship was him at the beginning of that journey until the end. And Greg and I were together for 7 years, and all of those 7 years were beautiful. But I'd say, you know, those last 6 months, so we welcomed our first son, Sal, on March 31st, 2015. And those last 6 months were so beautiful. Greg, even in those short 6 months, he was such an amazing dad. But there was a dark side during that period, and it was as the divisiveness between police and communities, particularly minorities communities, was rising. And it seemed like with each riot that happened, or each officer-involved shooting of an unarmed Black man, each case that came out, it seemed like it wasn't just about that case, that it was generalized to all police officers, that you were either for police or you were against them. And sorry about my dog. And I, you know, as the wife of a police officer and also as an advocate for minority communities, I felt like I was strung in the middle. You know, I felt so proud of my husband and the work that he had done. And I also felt very called. So I felt like I was stuck in the middle a bit. Can you guys hear me okay with the dogs? And I'm okay, so I'm sorry about that. And, you know, so I remember it was that summer, I think it was after Freddie Gray was killed out in Baltimore. I was standing in our kitchen and I was talking to Greg, and I said, Greg, what do you think about all this? And he said, you know, Cassie, no one wants a bad cop brought to justice more than a good cop. But for every one negative story you hear in the news, there are thousands of positive stories happening every day that go unnoticed. And that line of what he said really stuck with me all the way through to September 30th of 2015. So Greg was his first day back on day shift. It was his first day as a field training officer. Our son Sal turned 6 months old that day. He responded to work. It was 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and he was providing backup to a fellow officer. There was a call from the bank about a suspicious person. And Greg showed up to the scene. The man fled, ran into a mall, and that's where you see that officer standing in front of the mall in Columbia, South Carolina. And Greg was the first to catch up with the man. They engaged in a struggle, and the man shot Greg in the head, and he was killed instantly. And, you know, I feel very blessed that among the emotions that I felt since losing my husband, that anger has not been among the most prevalent. But I will say that in those first few hours after he was killed, I did feel angry, because I felt like what the divisive narrative was saying was that his service and sacrifice weren't valued or appreciated. And I wanted to speak out against that to help humanize the experience, you know, not just to say, to humanize him as a police officer, but if you look at some of the news that happened soon after Greg was killed, it was very much a young white cop next to a mugshot of a Black man. And, you know, you could see this divisive message, I feel like, already unfolding right before our eyes. And I couldn't bring Greg back, but I wanted to do all I could to speak out and stop that divisive message and bring it back to the human element. And, you know, so I remember a few hours after he was killed, after the press conference happened, we received a call from our local newspaper, and they wanted to talk about Greg. And I said, if you want to hear about Greg, I'd be happy to talk about Greg. And the reporter said that as I spoke, he was surrounded by other reporters who were holding their breath because it's uncommon to speak out after a tragedy occurs like that. And then I remember Senator Tim Scott called, and he said, Cassie, if there's anything that we can ever do for you, to just let me know. And I said, you could speak out on behalf of police. And he was on the Senate floor the next day talking about Greg and talking about law enforcement. And, you know, that's how it went. Every time that there was a chance to speak out, I did. And, you know, I did it for Greg. I did it for our son, Sal. But I didn't want him to look back at that news and just see hate. I wanted him to be able to see stories about his dad. But I did it also because I wanted to combat that divisiveness and do what I can in that moment to try to diffuse, I think, some of the tension. And so then at 3 in the morning, after Greg died, I couldn't sleep, and I shared this Facebook post. And in it, I asked for 2 things. So I asked, one, that people could share stories about Greg so Sal could learn about the man his father was, because he just turned 6 months old the day that Greg died. And I also asked, I said that Greg was a hero and many other cops are too, and I proposed using the hashtag Heroes in Blue as a way to try to bring awareness to those stories, like Greg said, that happen every day and go unnoticed. And so when that all started, I didn't think that this would be anything other than a hashtag. I wanted there to be an alternative to some of the other more divisive hashtags that were pro-law enforcement that were out there. I just wanted to say, you know, I appreciate that there are bad things happening, but there are so many good things that are happening too. So can we please have a space where we can recognize those good deeds? But that hashtag quickly started to grow. You know, I knew I wanted it to be something more than that. I just didn't know what. There was no vision. You know, I wasn't expecting my husband to die. And so if I were to describe the beginning stages of the organization, I'd really say that it was probably more focused as like a mutual support organization, focused on rallying community support as an effort to try to reduce some of the fear and distrust that was occurring mainly on the police side, to reduce some of that tension. So I'll talk a little bit about the activities that we did to do that under this Heroes in Blue name. So a few months after Greg died, the county where Greg was working named December 14th, which was our wedding anniversary, Greg Alia Day. And in honor of Greg Alia Day, I knew I wanted to do something to recognize the day and to show support for law enforcement. So we had this idea, what if we could if people could donate to local restaurants, then any money that was raised would be used to bring lunches to show appreciation to police on Greg Alia Day. Our goal was just to raise enough money to bring lunches to Greg's police department, which was pretty small. So only 25 officers would be there that day. But we were so successful that first year that we raised enough money for 200 lunches for 210 officers across 14 stations and over $3,500 in gift cards, which I think is pretty neat from the amount of community support we were able to rally in honor of this campaign. And last year, we more than doubled that value. We raised enough money for lunches for 531 officers, all local departments in Richland and Lexington counties and a few statewide agencies, and over $7,700 in gift certificates. And we just kicked off our 3rd annual Female Officer campaign yesterday. We also knew that we wanted this fallen officer support to be a part of the mission. So when my husband died, I think that the support that was rallied around my son and I and his family was really important for helping us to see that the divisive message that we were seeing really was in existence, that this community was much more united. And also, I'm not going to discredit the outstanding financial donations that happened. And each donation, I feel like, again, just reached out and supported our family and meant a lot to his colleagues as well. And so we wanted to be able to do that for other families of fallen officers. And so I remember it was March 18th of 2016. I was sitting in the Secretary of State's office. It was a little less than 6 months after Greg had died, sitting in the Secretary of State's office, getting our incorporation as a nonprofit in the state of South Carolina. And I heard word that an officer had been shot and killed in the upstate. And he was leaving behind 2 boys and a pregnant wife along the way. We, within hours, set up a GoFundMe campaign that raised over $193,000 for his family. Since then, we have also sadly had to do another GoFundMe campaign just recently. It's actually ongoing right now. So far, we've raised over $51,000 for the family of a trooper who was struck from behind, leaving behind 3 little girls who were 4, 5, and 2 years old in the upstate of South Carolina. In addition to that, we've donated nearly $3,000 to families of officers who die as a result of like a heart attack or an accident while on duty. And all of these things are important for lifting up officers, for rallying support for police, and helped shape our mission of the organization, which is of Heroes in Blue, which has been our organization thus far. And the focus was to promote community and police relationships through empathy and action, and to provide support to the colleagues and families of fallen officers. And, you know, I'm really proud of all that we accomplished early on in the organization, and I think it gained a lot of momentum. And I do think if you're looking from like a systems lens, I think that focusing on the police side of the puzzle to understand what they're experiencing and to decrease some of that tension and pain is really important. But we knew early on that if we wanted to make real change happen, if we wanted to really bridge police relationships with communities they serve, and in particular communities who are distrustful, we needed to do more. And so early on, I knew that we needed to do a lot more listening, a lot more learning, and a lot more understanding if we wanted to seek how we could create this bridge. And I think that's where more of these community psychology skills start unfolding even more into this work. I define this period of our organization as really using a lot of evaluation, respect for diversity, and collaboration to learn more about how we can help support that bridge, what's already going on, what needs there are, and how we can help. And is everyone doing good? Can I get feeling a thumbs up? I know I've been talking for a while. It keeps rolling. So thank you. All right. So this is my first time presenting these slides, so I think that they're really powerful to me. So we actually had the privilege of getting selected for this organization in town, boutique marketing firm, does provide support to nonprofits for marketing each year. And as they were helping us to shape this message, they shared these next few slides, and I thought they were so powerful when you're thinking about these issues and thinking about how we need to understand the bigger perspective of the different voices that are involved in an issue. And so really, like, while there's a lot of nuances to the different sides, when it comes down to it, you can view these issues as really are the police and community relationship as having two primary stakeholder groups, cops and community. And when I refer to community, I'm particularly referring to communities that have had negative or adverse experiences with police or distrustful, which are traditionally minority or lower income communities that tend to distrust police more. So there are two different frames, which I think were powerful that this marketing group showed when talking about the narratives that the groups can play, both of which I think you have to take it from the lens of that these are perspectives and narratives that are playing out on either side, and they each carry, I think, valid and they have weight to them. So on the cops end, there's a narrative that can be shared that police or people who support police can view them as heroes. So they're committed, they're hardworking, they're helpful, and that people who are against police, they're considered being resistors to police, that they're troublesome, distrust, that we can't trust them. So there's a narrative, not with all police and not all police supporters, but this narrative does exist as one that we need to be aware of. And on the other hand, there's a narrative from some members of the community that they are just trying to survive, and they are fighting an oppressive system that's judgmental and powerful. There's this power struggle. And so I think that these slides were powerful for me in thinking about having understanding of these different perspectives and voices that we needed to better understand. And I think what it really illuminated to me is that we need to embrace the dialectics of these different perspectives from a strengths-based understanding to say, what are the strengths that are occurring on both sides, and how can we seek solutions from both groups and find a common ground to work together towards. So some of the work that we've done, so to learn the strengths-based perspective, we've done a number of things. So we have done surveys. I'll share some of those results. A lot of partnerships, a lot of conversations, collaborations, community outreach activities. So this summary kind of comes from a number of different sources that have arisen over the past few years. So some of the things that we've learned is that first, police come face to face with some of the most heartbreaking scenarios. So this example that I have up here is from a deputy in the area who shared a story about how he was called by a foster child. And when he got there, You know, he saw that the fridge was broken, there was raw meat on the counter, the child hasn't eaten in 2 days. And so this deputy, it's a real story, deputy was there, waited even after his shift for 3 hours until the Department of Social Services could arrive. And this is sadly just one example of what police come face to face with every day. Some of the worst societal issues, so many of the issues that we community psychologists are trying to address around hunger, poverty, homelessness, police can be really seen as really front lines to seeing many of those issues. In a survey that we did this summer with police statewide, we learned, I'd say that police want to make change, but they need more resources. So when asked if community policing is important to them, 94% said they agreed or strongly agreed. 91% said they felt confident that they could improve the quality of their community, but only 29% felt they have enough resources to respond to needs as they come across them. And what that said to me is that you have police who want to be engaged in community policing initiatives. They want to help make a difference in the lives of those who are in need, but they don't have the resources to be able to do it by and large. And so that is a gap I think that we can try to help fill. When we asked them what they would do with more resources, I thought it was powerful to see some of the examples that emerged. And this is just the beginning. Even as I've been sharing some of these data, even more have come up. I presented to a group training for criminal investigations recently, and afterwards one officer was like, what can we do to connect with home builders? They're like, we have so many homes that are dilapidated, they're falling down, and we just don't have, normally police go out of their pocket, but they're like, we don't know what to do. We'd love to better connect. And so I think the more you open this pathway for what police, if they were given the resources, what they would be able to accomplish to help people in need is, I think, pretty powerful to see. I've also learned that when given the right tools, police can make a huge difference. And I think a really powerful example of this is with the law enforcement torch run. I was pretty shocked, I don't know if shock's the right word, but very impressed to learn that law enforcement worldwide is the largest single donor to Special Olympics, bigger than any corporation like Coca-Cola or anything else. And in South Carolina alone, they're on track to raise over $1 million this year, which I think is pretty impressive. And, you know, police are doing this every day. So they often go out of their own pockets to help people in need. So there's what I bring this up. So this is a powerful example of several officers stepping in to help a woman who was fleeing an abusive situation, but she had to move from Florida because of the hurricanes. And so these officers stepped in to help her and her children. And I think what this says to me is that police are coming across some of the worst issues that we face in our country. They want to help, but they need better resources and support to do that more effectively. Something that struck me a lot is I was talking to a police chief from the low country of our state recently, and he said, you know, Cassie, we really want to do community outreach, but we're not very good at it. And so I think that there are some departments that are outstanding in this work, and there are others that could use some more support to be able to do this work more effectively, which I think very much ties to community psychology skills and ability to help translate evidence-based strategies into practice. So looking more at the community lens, this is some of the work that I'm most excited about that we have coming up that we've been learning about. So I think one of the major reflections I had in preparing for this is that we need more open and honest dialogue about the challenges minority communities face. We need a space where police and members or advocates for minority or vulnerable communities can talk openly about the challenges that they're coming across if we really want to seek to make any real change happen. And so the story I'll share with you is I had heard from a number of police when I asked them, like, I remember I was meeting with Columbia Police Department early on in this work. I'm like, if there's one thing we could do for you, what would you want? And like, we'd really like to better improve our relationships with the non-English speaking, in particular the Latino community. So we know that there's crimes happening, particularly around domestic violence issues, but people don't trust us, so they're not reporting the crimes. So I reached out to a group in town, outstanding group called PASOS, which does a lot of health advocacy, in particular for the Latino community in South Carolina. And we held a meeting. It was myself, representatives from PASOS, and representatives from 4 different agencies in our 2-county area. And what was supposed to be a 1-hour meeting ended up turning into like 2.5 hours with 30-minute debrief and other phone calls, because I think none of us really understood how painful or challenged the relationships were. So I could go into a lot more details, and I'm happy to if we have time at the end, but there was a real openness of sharing, what members of the community were saying, why they were fearful and distrustful of police, and then the police sharing their experiences from that lens. And while there was an understanding from both perspectives, it was kind of like this, whoa, what are we going to do about it? Like, both sides have validity to them, but it makes it even more challenging to really seek real solutions. And so you'll see some of the things that are drafted up on either side, where we're looking at, okay, what are some of the needs that are emerging in the community, and also what are some of the ideas. And some things that struck us as best practices or potential best practices was even, for example, just like messaging. One of the departments in town does a really great job, Paso said, of just messaging that they're here for the Latino community and that they care, and that something as simple as that can go a long way. I also think that it's very important to have respectful, genuine presence that respects cultural and contextual norms and seeks to learn. So this commitment to humble inquiry, wanting to know, I know that there's so much, I'm not a police officer, and I'm not a member of a marginalized group, and there's so much that I have to learn and don't understand about these experiences if we want to grow. So 2 examples I'll share with you. The picture you see with one of our volunteers with the kid playing basketball, we went to a festival called Love, Peace, and Hip Hop. It's a really neat hip hop festival in South Carolina. And I've been trying to push for us to have more of a presence so we can have conversation in communities that wouldn't traditionally be connected with police. And I remember I reached out to the coordinator there, and he told me afterwards, so he was pretty clear. He's like, I have to talk to my team if we can have you all there. And they're pretty adamant that they didn't want any officers in uniform. So the officers that came and volunteered with us had to just wear shirts, so you couldn't identify them as police. And he was like, afterwards, who's the coordinator, he was like, there's a picture of us, we're racing to eat a donut off a string together and with 2 cops. And he was like, Cassie, there's no one else who could get me to race eating a donut off a string with 2 cops other than you. But it provided us with a space to be there, be present, and just listen to people and talk to them. And even if they didn't want to talk, just to have fun, which I think is important. And what you see on the other end is on September 30th of this year, which was the 2-year anniversary of my husband's death. We had a rally at the State House. Governor McMaster signed a proclamation that named September 30th Compassion and Action Day. We had speeches from myself, and also you'll see Pastor Juan Ibarra, Chief Kevin Cornett, and Shay Harley. We all spoke out and talked about our experiences and views on both some of our backgrounds and also what our hope is for bridging more change moving forward. And at the State House afterwards, we had different community organizations from throughout the area, so people could just go and get to know someone who's different from them. But importantly, I didn't script. No one's speech was scripted. People got to speak from their heart and share their own stories, and I think provide a space for real and open dialogue. And I was proud that the police stood there in support of that on a pretty painful day. We had representatives from throughout the area stand behind us, which I was proud of. I think that when we're willing to listen and learn from each other, that we can see some outstanding ideas from change. And so one of the other issues that I've seen that police face often is they come across people experiencing homelessness often. And so I want to dive more into understanding what can we do to help police better help people experiencing homelessness. And so that's a picture with me with representatives from the United Way of the Midlands. And I also have the logo for Homeless No More, because through talking with them more, I've learned that they're enacting a pretty outstanding initiative. They're going to come up with a fancier name, but it's like a voucher program basically, so that when a police officer comes across a family who is living out of a car or something, that they can then send them to this participating hotel. The hotel will then contact Homeless No More, who will then contact a social worker to have them on site and see if we can, oftentimes police are just going out of their own pocket to buy a hotel, but if we really want to be improving the effectiveness of supports that are delivered. We can see police, okay, they're coming face to face with it rather than buying them a hotel room. What if we connected them with those resources and saw that as kind of like an immediate response? And so that's just in the early work, but I think what it says to me is that there are these initiatives that are existing in our communities that we don't even really know about, and we could do more to evaluate and understand and develop some practice-based evidence from what's happening on the ground. I think it's just outstanding. I can't speak highly enough about these organizations and the police departments that are working with them. I think another important point as well is that these great initiatives and great ideas are happening, but we need to do more to help them spread, both locally and also to inform a broader evidence base. So the picture I have here is with me with Frederick from Midlands Fatherhood Coalition, which is an outstanding organization that helps dads who are facing barriers to being connected with their children, just to get like employment or to overcome child support issues, so they can be better connected with their families. And the Midlands Fatherhood Coalition has an outstanding relationship with one of our departments in town. They have a referral network, for example, that if a police officer picks up a dad for, say, child support issues, or they pick him up and learn that he's struggling, that they can connect them with the Fatherhood Coalition so they can get support, which I think is really encouraging. But what I also learned is that there are a lot of departments that don't even know about this resource or even know that the Midlands Fatherhood Coalition exists. So even locally, we need to have help to get this to spread. And also on a bigger level, what can we do to be learning about the effectiveness of these approaches that can then inform more national change initiatives? So this work is happening. It's on the ground. These partnerships are in existence. There are opportunities for having real dialogue, and we need to embed some more evaluation, some more learning, and build more strong partnerships so this work can spread. And so that's what I think has led to the vision for Serve and Connect. And so this is the first time I'm really presenting this information. We're probably going to officially unveil our name in the next few months. I've been slowly unveiling it. But the focus will be on restructuring how we can help cops help others, and that be the main focus of the work moving forward. So this is all in preliminary work. I've been working with Abe Wandersman as my mentor and some members of our board and other members of the team to think about how we can do this and be very strategic in bolstering this organization moving forward. So the purpose, I'd say, is to help police officers broaden their impact with the goal of being a resource for effective community policing initiatives in South Carolina. I'm not going to go in detail because I know we're kind of shorter on time, but some of the goals would be to help build the capacity of police to help communities in need, to learn about and spread best practices for community policing, to strengthen partnerships between police and community organizations, and I think inevitably to help to get some second order change and transformation around a cultural togetherness between police and community. And I see that as embedding a lot of increased trust and shared goals. Some of the evidence-based strategies I think that could be really effective in this work is basing it on implementation science, particularly the use of the interactive systems framework, improvement science, design thinking, and from community psychology, I'm specifically, so community psych principles around collaboration, evaluation, and respect for diversity. I've been very passionate since early in grad school about like social regularities, relationships, and social capital, which I think could play an important role, and the strong foundation on celebrating the paradox and dialectic, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that matters so much to me. So some of the key activities I could see us doing moving forward is to, first, that we could provide support to individual police departments. So assess their needs and resources and their readiness for change, evaluate what they're already doing ongoing, and suggest quality improvements, and also provide some training tools and technical assistance if they want to implement new initiatives. I think that we could help provide a support network for police focused on community-oriented policing. So this could include a database of best practices for community policing, series of newsletters or blogs or videos that highlight best practices and reinforce outstanding police and community partnerships, and provide a database of available community resources that are organized by county. So you could look on, if you're like in Richland County or Lexington, those are all counties in South Carolina, you can see what are some of the relevant community resources that police could then reach out to. So it's housed in one location. And then I also think it's important, you know, we've been testing and developing new ideas and partnership models based on needs that emerge. And so I think as they emerge, we should learn more about them, and those that are effective, we can think about what context they're most effective in, and then use that, share those as practice-based evidence strategies. So some examples of the initiatives that we've been developing already. Greg's Groceries is our partnership with Harvest Hope Food Bank, the food bank here in town. And the idea is that we provide a police officer with a box of non-perishable food. It's enough to feed a family of 6 for 7 days. And so we've just piloted this initiative. We gave 50 boxes initially. 30 went to one police department, an urban police department as a higher, larger size department with high capacity, and then a small rural department because we wanted to see how it works in both settings. We've had some really impressive success so far. We also learned a lot. I think that will inform us as we move beyond this pilot stage. But rich examples of how police, when they come across people who are hungry or in need, can deliver this box to help provide the box to give them kind of an emergency support. But then also that data gets funneled back to Harvest Hope so they can better structure the resources and the supports that they provide to identify pockets of need. And this was a neat example that I have up here about a police officer who already knew of this elderly woman because she had been taking care of her cat, but she learned that she was even in more dire need. She only had $10 to $16 a month for food, which is just awful. So Greg's Groceries was able to provide a little Band-Aid in that instance, and hopefully it will bring some more long-term support. We're also testing out a few other initiatives. So our partnership with the Midlands Fatherhood Coalition is growing. There's a police chief in Springdale who comes from a broken background himself and is very passionate about families and fathers and families. And so we are hosting and helping him set up a 5K, which will celebrate families and also raise money for the Fatherhood Coalition. So it's police raising money for a nonprofit that he sees as a value to the community. And we're also going to be working with them on setting up a referral process so we can help connect if dads come across dads who are, if police come across dads who are struggling, that they can help connect them to resources. I do want to point out, so Charles, who's in that picture on the left-hand side, he was just, I went to his funeral today, so please keep his family in your thoughts and your prayers. He's an outstanding leader in our community. We're also testing the Warm the Winter initiative. So we are going to be getting hats, gloves, and scarves to those who are experiencing homelessness. So police can give them to people who are experiencing homelessness as they come across it. So we'll see how that works. But the idea is just a way to say, we see you, you're a person, we care about you, and to have a positive interaction during the cold winter months. And we're also working with PASOs and with testing out with the local police department on doing a really a training on recommendations from the Latino community on how police, what are some of the best practices or suggestions they have for best relationships with police, and also to better describe what their struggles are. And then from there, we want to support the police department and then sifting through those recommendations to then say what they are committing to and putting, helping to develop a video that could be shared on social media channels that are accessed primarily by non-English speakers. So we want to test out and see how that model goes, and that's being developed collaboratively with both our organization, the police department, and PASOs to help develop and test this training model. So, you know, so we only have 15 minutes. I do think this is really important for me to go into. The work that we do does not exist in a vacuum. And just as this work started with the loss of my husband, I think that it has been very heavily impacted through my process with the criminal justice system myself and the sentencing, the court process against Jarvis Hall, who's the man who killed my husband. And so, you know, I survived largely for a long time by not even thinking about him, about Jarvis Hall. I didn't even say his name. And I knew that nothing could bring Greg back. And, it was a pretty awful position to be put in to think about what you would recommend. Like the lawyers asked, what would I recommend for the man who killed my husband? And it's an enormous weight to put on anyone. And I remember one day I went to go face the lawyers, and it seemed like the resolution was going to be one that I didn't advocate for, and it could lead to potentially years of my life in the criminal justice system. And I remember I was driving actually to Atlanta for another work trip, and I just like, how on earth am I going to survive this? How am I going to be able to be a loving mother to my son? How am I going to be able to move forward? How can I stand here as an advocate for not only police, but also communities and face this? And it was, that process was such a painful journey for me, but what I came to, and I was going to show the clip of the speech that I gave, but I can share it with them if anyone's interested. When I spoke out both on the courtroom floor and afterwards in a press statement, describing how I pictured, what brought me peace was picturing Mr. Hall as a little boy, and so full of hope and promise, and that I don't know what led him to kill my husband, but I know that there are too many reasons that could lead someone down that road. And I said that there are no sides in these issues, and we too often try to paint it as that there are two sides, and there are none, because when anyone dies, we all lose, and that there were two lives that were lost, both my husband's and Mr. Hall, who will spend the rest of his life in prison. And we need to do better to work hard to prevent these cases and to see people who are struggling and in need and help them and build them up and give them the resources that they need. So I'd be happy to share that along if anyone's interested. But soon after the sentencing happened, the Ferrando Castillo verdict came out, and that was also another really painful struggle for me. I remember watching the video of the shooting with the little girl in the car, and I pictured my son, who's 2.5, in that car, and we have to do better. Every life lost is a loss to us all, and if I'm going to stand here and advocate for change, like I have to understand the pain that's experienced by so many people involved in this when it comes to police and community relationships, and understand the richness or the humanity that's involved in it. We spend so much time arguing and jumping to a conclusion about whether something's justified or not, or whose team we're on, but really at the end of the day, a life was lost. And I think we need to start there and start with that base of humanity if we're going to seek real change moving forward. So I think a big reflection that I've had, I remember reading In Praise of Paradox my first year of graduate school by Julian Rappaport, and it struck me. It blew me away, and I didn't understand how impactful it would be in the rest of my life. And I think I reference this article often now because it's in the work that we're doing so often. We care so much to make a difference in the lives of others and to do meaningful action-oriented change. And I think in doing so, we need to come back to this place of appreciating that we can never become one-sided. We must always look for the dialectic, the other perspective, if we want to seek true transformational change, and that's something that really sticks with me. So if I were to reflect on some of the ways that we can make a difference with our work in community psychology through this personal experience that I've had and talked to you far too much about today, that I think we need to have the strength to embrace the dialectic and fight the urge to become one-sided. And it's so hard when we're so passionate and care so much. But there's so much power in seeking to embrace those diverse opinions. I think that we're trained in critical thinking skills and the use of evidence, and that we can help support others in using it. Like I was talking to my friend recently about, we're talking about mass shootings and what some of the evidence says, and she was like, that's something I think we can bring is this use of critical thinking to understand what research says and then help communicate that to others. I think that's a gift that we have through our education and our training. That we can use our skills in empowerment and a strengths-focused orientation to lift all members society up to create new ways of interacting and restructure those regularities. We can never lose hope that unity is possible. And if we lose hope, I don't know, we are such a hopeful profession, we just can't. And that never forgets the humanity in our shared experiences. And I think that's something that community psychology brings to us as well, is this appreciation for the experiences of all, seeing people not blaming the victim, not looking to, accuse people, but seeing all of us as human and having this shared experience and seeking to understand from that human lens. And I think that really brings us the gift of empathy that I think can drive us towards effective action. So I've talked a lot. I shared I'm proud and honored to be able to share this kind of first unveiling of the vision for Serve and Connect. I know I've said a lot of things and talked for a while, which is not great discussion style. But I would love to hear from you what ideas that you may have of how we can better integrate community psychology values, or answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Can folks hear me? Okay, fantastic. So we have a few folks on the line with us. Does anybody have any questions for Cassie or a reaction to the question she just posed for us?
And I'd love your reactions too. I mean, this is my first time I've presented a lot to community groups in town, but I feel very thankful to have a space where I can share with other community psychologists. I try to embrace these different perspectives, but it's hard, to keep an open mind and open perspective. And I'm very open to, Abe always calls it, the critical friend. But if you have some challenges or things that you think I should think more through, I very much care about trying to do all I can to make a difference. And so I'm very open to being challenged or asked questions or being posed different ways of thinking.
Cassie, I was thinking, when you were talking about community policing specifically, and you were talking about the possibility of a database of empirically validated community policing practices, I know in my experience, community policing is one of those terms that has gotten co-opted, so that a lot of departments or individuals who say that they're engaged in community policing, if you actually look at what they're doing, it's not community policing at all. And they don't have a clear understanding of it. So I was wondering what kind of research you've looked at that might help with that very basic point of how do we just get apart, it's one thing to come up with what are empirical practices. It's another just to make sure that communities and departments have a solid understanding of what the whole concept is, besides just a word that they have to put in a grant to get more funding.
I totally agree with you. And, I even struggle with using the word community policing. I was talking with one of our board members who's very involved. He's the executive director of a group for law enforcement statewide. And I was asking him, I'm like, is this really community policing? And so I think you're right that really the term needs more clarity and understanding. Because what I'm learning is in the research that I've looked at, the idea that police being involved in community and, being present for, knowing neighbors, being present not when just bad things are happening. There's evidence from I've seen in the literature that does lead to more trust and perceptions that police are valid in the work that they're doing. I guess I'm trying to come up with the right word. But I think what there needs to be a different name for is, and maybe there is, and I just need to dive more into it, but these are really more like community outreach type of initiatives that I think can help build relationships, but there's not, community policing, as you said, is something I think different than that. When we're talking about building community relationships through different specific initiatives or outreach efforts, that's where I think that there's not sound research or evidence for how to do that well and what that really is. And I think you're absolutely right.
I know, just as a follow-up point, in my experience, you get, when you're explaining community policing, and by that I mean, you know, the official definition of community policing, that you're present in the communities and developing relationships on the street. There are people who get it immediately and embrace it immediately. And some of them are brand new officers, and some of them have been officers for 20 years. And they're the ones who look at the concept and say, I know what you're talking about. You're absolutely right. This is what we need to do. And then there's others who, and I think it's because, you know, they've been thinking about these issues, and it, you know, it makes sense for them personally, and it makes sense for them in terms of what they've seen. But I think that there's other people, both officers and members of the community, who don't grasp the point. So you want me to make sure that whenever I'm patrolling, that I stop and tell these kids to disband and leave, and you're like, no, that's not what community.
No, yeah, I think so. The police chief I was talking to, he was like, yeah, and there's like, and then I mean, to be blunt about it, I think that there's some police that come from a pretty old school mentality. They're kind of resistant to the idea. Like one of the chiefs, he was like, some of our older school cops are like, we don't want to hug a thug. And it's like, no, that's not what this is about. I think so. Some of the ways I think that having more evidence, or like some examples, if we're talking about initiatives, like I was talking to United Way of the Midlands, I was suggesting that like with some of their outreach activities that they can engage police into, kind of showing like data, like when you refer a person experiencing homelessness to this service, this is what happens as a result. Because I think like when they see like, oh, this method of policing actually leads to less crime or less violence, or actually helps people get off the street, I think it's hard for some people to have that more prevention mindset, that change is possible when coming at it from a compassionate, proactive lens, that you don't always have to have the hammer to make change happen. I think it's largely coming from a place that they want to see change happen, but they don't understand that prevention can be a way to have that happen.
Cassie, I appreciated your conversation, really speaking to kind of the dialectic and the paradox, and how do we hold on to multiple perspectives. And I think this was something that came up for our group when we were really trying to put together even our vision statement, because we initially had some language talking about offenders and victims, and really wanting to move away from this binary where either you're one or the other. But I wonder, I mean, I've been talking with some folks in the realm of violence against women, many times working with advocates around how do we embrace the complexity of perpetrators, right? So that while this is somebody who's really hurt this person, they also have their own history of trauma at the same time that we're many times entering them into the criminal justice system, for example, in which we have high rates of rape and violence in prisons, right? And so that there's so many layers to this. And one of the pieces I've started to explore with folks a little bit is not only our tendency to want to put people into these buckets of the good versus the bad, but also times at which putting people into buckets can actually help with our own self-preservation and being able to take care of ourselves. Because when you have to see that harm day after day after day, it's kind of a way to allow yourself to keep going. But at the same time, then it also can be really damaging in trying to build any type of partnership. So I don't know if that's something you've thought more about, or how you've worked through that.
So I think, yes, and I would be really interested to talk through it even more with you. I'm looking at the time, but I'm happy to keep staying on. But two ways, that examples of when I thought about that is one, in response to the sentencing of Jarvis Hall. I think there was an overwhelming, there were a lot of positive responses to what I said, but there was also a lot of backlash in terms of oh, he should have been hung, some really divisive responses against me having empathy for him. And I think that there's a lack of understanding too about empathy or seeking a dialectic, this bigger picture that looks at different sides of the equation. And I think, like with Jarvis Hall, like I will never say that it was okay that he killed my husband. It was, and he took his life. Like that was, I will never say that was okay, but I can appreciate by looking at his story and who he was and seeing him as a person, that there are too many ways that if we had seen him before as someone who was struggling and in pain, that we could have helped him, you know. So if we just label him as a monster that killed Greg, well, that doesn't help us at all, because what that means is that they're just going to be monsters and there's nothing we can do to stop someone else from being killed in the future, you know. But if we look at him like a person who had hope, and actually we learned from his story afterwards, there's a whole other piece to this trial, but he was really a man who spiraled out of control. I don't know why. He had a bright future. He was going to pharmacy school, and then he joined the military, and he just kept spiraling downward. And so I think some of those labels, like if we just labeled him as monster or criminal, it's like, well, what does that mean for actually understanding where we could have prevented this from happening in the first place? Does that make sense? So I think that's the power to the label too, is by like seeing him as a person in that case. But the same thing I actually wrote. I don't know if anyone watches Live PD. Have you heard of it? It's a show on A&E. Sounds pretty big, but one of the departments in town is one of is participating, and there was a pretty controversial case where they got into a car chase. It happened that there was a little girl in the car. This man emerged with a toddler in his arms. They were like flinging him around, like the girl was being flung around as they were in this police struggle. And I actually wrote a piece in the newspaper that was calling for empathy for all people involved. You know, not only the girl, not only the officer, but also the man. Like, what could have led him into that position? You know, clearly, like, I believe that he cared about, it ended up being his daughter, that he cared about her. Like, why was he in that position, and how can we help him? You know, and so if we were like, there are people like, how could you, he needs to be locked away forever. And it's like, well, how does that help anyone if he's locked away forever? Like, if that's the right thing for her, like, sadly, maybe that could happen, but I'd like to have hope that there's a way to help him, you know, and that if we see everyone as not being able to be helpful, then that little girl's life's destroyed, and so is his, and that's a pretty sad scenario. So I think I don't know what the answer is to labels, but if we can think about it again from this, like, how do labels help us prevent more pain and more harm from happening and prevent more tragedies from occurring?